So when the entire economy looks like it's about to burn to the ground, how does the Federal Reserve actually put out the fire? Well, it turns out they don't just show up with a fire hose. They bring out the big guns, something we're going to call the money cannon. We're going to break down exactly how this thing works, who it really helps, and most importantly, why it matters to you.
Let's just start with a number. Look at that, $700 billion. That is the colossal amount of money the government pumped into failing banks back in 2008. But you gotta ask, where did all that cash even come from? And what did it really do? That's the big question we're digging into.
Okay, first up, a system on fire. To really get what the Fed did, we have to rewind the clock and look at just how bad the problem was back in 2008.
To put it bluntly, in 2008, the global economy was doing a flawless 10-meter dive into concrete. Seriously, Lehman Brothers had just collapsed, total panic was spreading like wildfire, and millions of ordinary people were about to lose their homes. The government and the Fed felt like they had to do something, and do it fast, before the whole system just came crashing down.
So what was their weapon of choice in this crisis?
Well, it was a two-part strategy that has been perfectly nicknamed the money cannon.
Part one of this strategy is all about cheap money. The idea here is actually pretty simple. The Fed just cuts interest rates down to basically zero. This makes it incredibly easy and, cheap for banks to get their hands on money. One source we looked at put it perfectly. It's like the Fed just screamed from the rooftops, "Hey banks, money's free. Go throw it at people like it's a game show." The whole point was just to get money, any money, moving through the economy again. But, as you can probably guess, this had some massive, and you could say predictable, side effects. This led to what one source called a housing gold rush. With money being so easy to get, we saw the rise of those infamous ninja loans. And yep, that stands for no income, no job, and no assets. It basically created a national pastime of buying stuff they can't afford. But here's the thing. Just making money cheap wasn't enough to stop the bleeding. The Fed needed an even bigger cannon. And that brings us to the really wild part, how you literally print $1 trillion. This is where it gets a little more mind-bending. The tool is called Quantitative Easing, or just QE for short. Now, stick with me here. The Fed creates brand new digital money, and then uses that money to buy stuff, like government bonds or all that toxic mortgage debt, directly from the commercial banks. So our source breaks this down into a really simple three-step process. First, the Fed just creates new money out of thin air. We're talking about just typing numbers into a computer. Step two, it uses that new digital cash to buy up all the mortgage junk that was poisoning the bank's books. And third, with their balance sheets now magically clean, the banks are, in theory, free to start lending money out into the economy again. And just how much money are we talking about here? Well, you might want to sit down for this. One source points out that an absolutely mind-blowing 40% of all US dollars that have ever existed were created between 2020 and 2022. 40%. That is just a staggering amount of new money flooding the system. This whole thing really highlights how abstract money is. One writer put it in a way that just sticks with you. The Fed just rips out a page, writes, "I have $1 trillion," and 10,000 bankers in silk vests agree to call it the truth. It's money that only exists because we all agree it does. So what happens when you fire trillions of new dollars into the economy? Well, it doesn't go everywhere equally. In fact, it creates what many have called two different economies.
The core argument, right, is that this money cannon creates a deep disconnect between what's happening on Wall Street and what's happening on Main Street, the real economy where most of us actually live and work.
And this slide just lays out the contrast so clearly. On the Wall Street side of things, all that new money makes asset prices like stocks go through the roof. The very banks that caused the problem get a $700 billion pillow to land on. They call this privatized profits. But for Main Street, all that new money chasing the same amount of goods means your money is worth less every day. Rent becomes unaffordable. This is what they mean by socialized losses. So this growing divide, this feeling that money can just be printed forever, it led to a kind of rebellion, a search for a different kind of money, something people call hard money. And this is exactly where Bitcoin enters the picture. Its creation in 2009, right in the ashes of the financial crisis, is seen by many as no coincidence at all. One source frames it as a direct reaction, basically a middle finger to Wall Street. It was a tech-based answer to a world of infinite money print. And this table really shows you the fundamental difference. The Fed's easy money,
Well, its supply is unlimited, and it's controlled by a small committee. They can decide to print more just because it's a bad Tuesday. In contrast, Bitcoin's hard money has a supply that is permanently capped at 21 million. It's decentralized, controlled by code, and its creation is totally predictable. Okay, this brings us to our final section. The system didn't totally collapse, but what are the long-term risks we're living with now? What is the next Jenga block that could make the whole tower fall? And this is a huge point. The money cannon might have patched the holes in the financial system, but many argue that in the process, something way more important, public trust, has been burned to the ground. The faith that people have in the system itself has been seriously damaged.
This really speaks to how fragile the whole thing might be. The analogy used is a Jenga tower made of lies. The bubble just keeps floating higher and higher as long as that cash spigot stays on. But the big question is, what happens when it finally has to shut off? And that leaves us right here with this final critical question. The tools that were used in 2008 and again in 2020, they haven't gone anywhere. The money cannon is still loaded and ready to go. So the question we all have to ask is, what happens when it fires next?